Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. Today we are blessed to have Scott Maderer with us. Scott is an expert in helping folks transition from working to living their calling, which I think I need to take some lessons on that. Some days it feels like I'm working. And Scott has been in the coaching world since 2011 and has been a full-time coach since 2017. And I think fairly recently, Scott, you came out with a new book, Inspired Living, Assembling the Puzzle of Your Call by Mastering Your Time, Your Talent, and Your Treasures. And I'll kick it over to you and let you give a little more formal of an introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, that's always fun, right, with the introduction stuff. The book came out in July of 2024, so it is pretty recently out at the time that we're recording this. So I'm one of those folks, like a lot of folks, that I think has kind of done a little bit of everything in their life. You know, I started my first business when I was 12 years old. I actually started a painting business, painting other people's offices and that sort of thing. And I figured out really quickly that painting in the hot Texas sun was not a lot of fun. So I went and got all the jobs and then hired my high school buddies, my middle school buddies, to do the actual painting and paid them. And I made the difference in the job, that kind of thing. So I learned about bidding jobs and, sometimes you screw it up and, oh, nope, lost money on that and all of that. Started doing that. I've worked in retail. I've worked in sales. I was a school teacher for 16 years because I actually thought I was going to go into medical research. That's all my degrees, and my education was in science and medical research. And I went and did medical research and figured out that that's not actually about helping people. That's actually about chasing grant money. And that's like 90% of their effort was getting funding and 10% was doing the work. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to do that for the rest of my life. So I pivoted and became a school teacher. Loved that. Did that for 16 years. Taught science for middle school, high school, taught adult ed, worked in systemic science reform, did, all sorts of different things with that kind of gear. But eventually, anybody that knows a teacher knows that teaching is an emotionally draining job. You don't get a lot of money. It's a lot of long hours. Eventually kind of burned out on that, went and did a few things in the interim, sold cars and, just part-time things, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and then pivoted and went into the corporate world, working for a testing company. So in the names of my students, I joined the dark side because I went from teaching to testing, so that I was kind of one of those moments of, oh, really? But again, the gear, it was a nonprofit company. They did a lot of testing, but the focus of the testing was using testing to help find equity in education. So doing things that would help students have other opportunities. And I worked myself up. I was promoted basically every other year while I was there until I got into kind of a senior executive position. Spent a lot of time on planes and airports and, got to see a lot of what the airport and the hotel rooms and the conference rooms looked like in a lot of really nice places. Everyone always says, travel for work. Oh, you got to go to such neat places. Yeah, and I saw nothing. It's like, I know what the airport looks like and the hotel room, and that's about it. So you got to do all of that. And again, that kind of began to burn out. And I did some self-examination and some work and my wife and I had gone through our own personal journey, and I'm happy to share more about that if you'd like. That kind of caused people to start reaching out to us for help. And as they did that, I realized that throughout all of these different parts of my life, the parts that really gave me energy, gave me focus, that they were the ones that felt most aligned with what I was supposed to be doing, what I had been put on the planet to do, were those opportunities where I got to help other people kind of figure out what was in their way, get unstuck, and get moving forward. Whether that was in the corporate job, whether that was in teaching, whatever it was those parts that fed my soul. And so I began realizing, well, people are asking me for help. I can coach people. I've got tools, I've got techniques, I've got knowledge, I've got skills. So let me begin to help these folks get unstuck. And that's when we started the coaching business. And as you said, eventually took that full time. I've worked with clients in 20 countries all over the world. And, I work from home. My commute's a lot better. I don't spend nearly as much time in airports. And I enjoy, having those moments of seeing folks get unstuck and move forward and do what they're supposed to do.
Awesome. I can't, you talk about commuting and any of us that have went to, lots of conferences, and I spent some time in the nonprofit association world, and there were 4 or 5 conferences every year. And to your point, many times you go to those places and you don't see much of anything other than
Nope.
ugly carpet and big chandeliers. But early in my career, I started for a company in the concrete block world, and they had hired me to eventually move from Pennsylvania to Illinois to run a plant in just south of Chicago. And about the second week, they came to me and said, "Look, we really need you out there. Can you commute?" And I was young enough and naive enough at that point in my career when they asked me that, I said, "What do you mean commute?" I said, "I can't drive to Chicago every day. I mean, that's a 10-hour drive." And my boss at the time looked at me and said, No. We want you to fly out on Monday, work all week, and then fly home for the weekend." And I remember thinking how exciting that was, that I get to fly every week. And long story short, over a 2-year period, I did that basically for about 45 weeks. That takes its toll on you. You get tired of that.
It does. It does. Yeah, there was a particular flight that I was on that I got to know the crew because it was almost always the same crew, and I was almost always on the same flight. And so, I'd get on the plane and it's like, "Hey, Susan, how you doing? How are the kids?" It's like, it's like old home week because I got to know them and know a little bit about them and their life and what's going on just because I was seeing them, 3-4 times a month. I might as well get to know them, right?
Absolutely. So, flying on an airplane or spending time traveling that much, I guess at the end of the day, is that busyness or productivity, which was one of the questions that I had for you. And, what is the difference between being busy or being productive, and how would, that fit into that? Yeah.
Yeah. So busy, first off, I think nowadays we almost hold busy as a badge of honor, right? People say, "So how you doing?" And usually the answer is one of two things. It's either "I'm doing fine," which is basically a code saying, "I really don't want to talk to you right now. Please leave me alone," because it doesn't actually mean anything. It has no content to it. Or they'll say, "Oh, I'm busy." That's almost the knee-jerk answer, especially folks that are in business or working for yourself or working for a company. It's always "I'm busy." And to me, I'm kind of like, why do we hold that up as a badge of honor? Because if you look at the word busy, all it really means is I'm doing a bunch of stuff.
Yep.
I'm doing a bunch of stuff. Well, is doing a bunch of stuff necessarily something to hold up as, "Yay, I'm doing a bunch of stuff"? Well, it depends, right? I think all of us would look at that and go, well, if it's good stuff and it's the right stuff, well, then it's good. And if it's not the right stuff, well, then it's bad. And so the difference is productivity is not just doing a bunch of stuff, but doing stuff that has an impact, doing stuff that moves things forward. So as a business owner, we all know there's a certain amount of work that we have to do that just kind of has to get done. It's busy work.
Yep.
In my world, it's things like answering emails. 90% of the emails that I read and look at don't move my business forward one iota. 10% do. But there's a certain amount of time I have to spend taking care of my emails. So that's kind of that short, busy work, that short, low impact. It's not really going to move the needle. When I'm productive is when I'm doing the work that actually moves my business forward. That could be spending time with a client. That could be spending time developing a new product. That could be spending time doing marketing in ways that are really effective and efficient and generate new clients and new customers. The trick is knowing the difference between what's your productive time and what's your busy time. And then making sure that you're spending, it's the old 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort, making sure that you're spending the time on the stuff that's productive. And that's where you're giving your best energy, your best effort, your best work. And that other stuff, you're either delegating it, dumping it, or finding a way to do it more efficiently and kind of get it off your plate as much as humanly possible.
Got it. So what I'm picturing in my mind, I use the
Eisenhower matrix.
Matrix. And, I'm kind of picturing in my mind, even for myself, maybe another layer of that is to create another version of that, or, basically say what things are productive, what things are the things I just have to do, and what things can I shove off to somebody else or get a VA or someone else to do it.
So yeah, applying productivity onto the Eisenhower matrix, the most productive stuff is usually that stuff that is important but not urgent.
Yep.
So, if for those folks that don't know listening, just so we're not talking over anyone's head, Eisenhower matrix is basically just saying urgent and important, dividing that into 4 quadrants. Some things are urgent and important. Some things are not urgent but important. Some things are not important but urgent. And some things are not important and not urgent. The productive work, the most productive work, generally you're going to do important and urgent. That doesn't get ignored. If the building is on fire and it's important that the building not be on fire, we go do that. So that quadrant we usually don't have to worry about. The trick is that we spend more busy work is that urgent but not important work, and productive work is the not urgent but important quadrant. If you think about Eisenhower, that's really where you're dividing. So it's making sure you're spending enough time and energy in that, hey, this is important, but I could put it off till next week quadrant.
So, and I'll make sure we add a link to one of, an Eisenhower. You can find them if you Google it or you look online, but we'll add a link in the show notes so that folks can download one and see it. Now, you mentioned one other thing earlier, talking about your personal journey, and you mentioned about finding what actually, gives you energy rather than what drains you. And how much does that go into that productiveness and busyness? I guess my question is, with me, I know many times the things that are productive and move my business forward are also the things that give me energy. They're the things that, I can do at any time of day. And there are other things that I know for myself, I have to decide that I got to do that at my peak time because it's going to drain me of a lot of energy. So what are your thoughts on how you tie in your mission and productivity or AKA being busy rather than productive?
Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it too is realize that, as you said, you've got to be aware of what is it that gives you energy versus what is it that drains you energy. And then you've got to make sure that you're planning and spending that energy very effectively. So I a lot of times talk with people about energy management as opposed to time management. I actually hate the term time management because at the end of the day, we don't manage time.
Yep.
The only thing we manage is ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. It's how we use time. The time is just there. You get up in the morning and guess what? Time starts clicking and it continues to click until you go to bed at night. That's just going to happen. So it's how we spend the time as opposed to how we manage it. And when you look at it that way, then you start adding that layer of thinking about, hey, what is it that gives me energy? And a lot of times you're right. The things that give you energy are also giving you clues to these are areas that maybe are more in alignment with what you're really designed to do, put on the world to do. And yet at the same time, there's an awareness of there's always, I don't care, you could be living 100% into your calling, the laundry still has to get done.
Yep.
There's a certain amount of work. I don't know anybody. I'm sure there is someone out there, but I have yet to meet them that gets up in the morning and goes, yay, it's laundry day. It just, most of us is kind of like, that's just a chore. We just got to get laundry done. And again, whether it's your life or your business, there's things like that it's got to get done. Now, again, there's different ways you can do that. Could I offload this? Could I pay someone else to do it? Those sorts of things. It doesn't matter. There's a certain amount of everybody's life, business, energy that even if it's in alignment with your calling, it may drain energy. So as an example, sometimes the clients that I'm working with, so I work in the area of time and money both. And sometimes the areas that I'm working with somebody, maybe they're in a crisis situation. They're really struggling. Their business is about to go under. and I'm kind of the last gasp for help. Well, working with them is 100% in alignment with my calling,
Yep.
because that's what I love. I love doing it. At the same time, I'm aware of the fact that when I have a client call with that client, I block off an hour after that client call for a nap,
Yep.
because I'm pouring energy into the relationship during that call. I'm going to be drained of energy, So it isn't only, hey, is this in alignment with my calling? It's also sometimes even what is the functionality that I'm performing during that part of the day or that kind of call. And as you develop that awareness, you can do things like what I just said. You can go, I'm meeting with that client. They're in a crisis. I need to block off some time, not let anyone else schedule a call, not run from this meeting right to the next meeting. I need a little bit of time to recharge my batteries, to go eat something, go for a walk, get a drink, take a nap, whatever it is, to put some of that energy back into me before I go to the next thing that's going to, I have to expend energy to do.
Yep. I want to back up for 1 second. You mentioned about the one person out there that might enjoy doing laundry, and I can't help but to share the story I read not long ago. There was an Amish family, and in their community, their Amish church had decided that it was okay for them to get automatic washers. So the Amish in many communities still use the old wringer washers, which take time. And so the husband went home and he was pretty excited to tell his wife that I'm going to go get you an automatic washer and you don't have to spend all this time doing laundry. And she stopped him and said, no, I do not want that. I like doing laundry the way I do. And he couldn't quite understand because he thought he was doing something nice. And she explained to him that while I do laundry, although most people would look at it as a mindless job, she said, that's my one time every day, because I'm sure they had a large family. That's my one time every day that I have time to reflect, pray, and do those things, which kind of, is a segue and made me think about, as you were describing this, the other piece that's missing, I think, for people that are busy opposed to being productive, or having that ability, like you just said, to schedule a little bit of downtime after a draining activity, is very rarely do they reflect. Would you agree to that?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So I actually talk about one of the frameworks that I lay out in my book and that I use with clients is this idea, and you can apply it to time, you can apply it to money, you can apply it to activity, you can apply this a lot of different ways. It's a great thing about frameworks is they can usually apply in more than one way, is this idea of, make a plan, right? So in money, we would call that a budget. And in productivity, we would call that usually a plan for the day, a calendar, a to-do list, these sorts of things. So you make a plan, then you execute on the plan. So you got to go do something. And then you need to review. So that's what happened. Did it happen the way I wanted it to? Did it not happen the way I wanted it to? Reflect. And notice I separate those, because review is just what happened.
Yep.
Reflect is, yeah, but what about it? Was it better than I expected? Was it worse than I expected? Why did it not go the way I wanted it to? It's going deeper than just looking at what happened. And then you revise, right? Make changes, make adaptations, do something different, make a change, and then you repeat. Do it all over again. Plan. And that kind of framework, the neat thing about it is it's focused less on fixing everything, making these massive changes, which, everyone wants to do that. They want to knock the ball out of the park. And what I found is the much more successful folks focus on those incremental changes. They focus on, I'm 1% better. I'm just a little better today than I was yesterday. But I do that every single day. And all of a sudden, when you do that, man, over a year, that energy, that change multiplies. It kind of adds one to the next, to the next, to the next. And you'd be amazed at the kind of change you can make over a year in any area of your life by just simply adapting that framework of plan something out, execute on the plan, look at what happened, review and reflect, revise, make changes. I'm going to do something a little different, and then repeat and do it all over again. And the amount of change that I see people make is astronomical.
Absolutely. So one other question that came to mind was, for the most part, everything that you've described works great for for folks that own their own business or have the ability to schedule their own time. I'm also thinking about how can someone that works for somebody, if they don't have control over each step along the way, being able to delegate, and even to the point of maybe filling their calendar, maybe someone else is putting things on their calendar, how can they benefit from the same thought pattern and framework?
Sure. So I developed a lot of these ideas while I was actually working as a teacher and in the corporate world. So I actually thought about this, to your point, while I was in that very environment of not being, and even when I worked into, kind of a senior position, I was still middle management. So I had people below me, and middle management, right, kind of gets it from both ends. You have people below me putting demands on your time. You have people above you putting demands on your time. It's kind of, okay. So a lot of times then it comes back to you still have to do the same sort of idea of looking at what's going on, making your own plans, executing on those plans, doing all of those steps that we just talked about is still vital. The piece that I would add, and by the way, this is still true if you're a solopreneur and only work for yourself, because guess what? You probably have a partner or a spouse, or you have clients, or there's still people that are going to interact with you. Very few businesses are 100% truly never talk to another person, and it's very rare. It does happen, very small percentage. And the factor that you're adding in there is now communication and clarity, right? It's being able to communicate clearly with other folks. So as an example, I was in the corporate world. I had a certain amount of things that I needed to get done. The position that I was actually promoted to, most people in that position were working between 60 and 80 hours a week. When I started that position, I was working 70, 80 hours a week. But very quickly, I began to look at it and go, okay, what are the actual drivers? What are the things that are about productivity? What are the things that are actually moving the needle? And then I began to go to those people who, like you said, were putting things on my calendar and doing things like that and giving me new duties. And I would go in very clearly, okay, here's the 17 things that you've asked me to do. Here's how much time I actually have, I'm only here a certain number of hours of the day. I can get these done. I can get some of these done, but I can't get all of these done. What do you want me to let go of? What is the least important? What can I take off of my plate? I also did things like literally in my email signature, and this is when I was in a corporate environment with clients and everything else. It literally said, I only answer email at these times of the day.
Yep.
If it's more important and it's an emergency, here's my phone number, call me. Otherwise, I'll get back to you during one of those 3 times of the day, because I only answered email 3 times a day. And again, I had clients. I had people that really and truly could have an emergency. Guess what? They learned real quick when to pick up the phone and call and when not to.
Yep.
And I would get phone calls, or I would not get phone calls, because they can kind of self-regulate. So that's, again, an example of communication and clarity. Because here's the thing. The truth is, and be honest, we've all had it happen or done it to somebody. You send the email, you wait about 5 minutes, you haven't gotten an answer, so you now pick up the phone and call them. It's like, skip the email, just pick up the phone and call them. Or again, if you knew, hey, you know what? They only answer email at noon and at 3 and 8 in the morning or whatever. It's noon. It's 12:30. It's 1 o'clock. They may not get back to me right away, but they'll get back to me this afternoon. If you already know that, you can decide, do I send the email? Do I not send the email? Do I pick up the phone and call them? So it's that awareness and communication and clarity. Believe it or not, even in a corporate environment, you actually have a lot more control over what you do and when you do it than you might believe, if you have the bravery to actually have those tough conversations with your boss, with your coworkers, with other people, and kind of train them. And it does take some time and some clarity and some communication and some training. This is how I work most efficiently. This is how you can get the most out of me. Because guess what? That's actually what your boss wants.
Yep.
Your boss wants you to do the best job possible.
There's nothing better than going to your boss and saying, "Hey, I have a way for me to be more productive." Chances are they're gonna give it some great thought. Now,
Your boss, if they're a good boss, your boss wants you to perform at your best abilities.
absolutely. So, I guess giving a little bit of a shameless plug for both of us, because we are both DISC consultants and utilize DISC, and you were talking about communication and having those tough conversations. I think it would be of great importance that someone go through at least a basic, do their own DISC assessment and go through a basic DISC training so that they can understand a little bit better how to better communicate with different types of people. Because in my experiences, so often where communication goes off is the fact that you have two different styles and two different groups of people that don't know how to interact with each other because they don't understand why everybody's not like them. I mean, is what it boils down to.
And I've seen that as well. And I'll give you two quick examples. And again, back from when I was in the corporate world, but this applies anywhere. And I agree, DISC is a great framework, not because it's the only framework, not because there aren't others that are equally valid, but simply because I can hold it in my head. It's like I'm pretty smart, but there's only so much information I can hold in my head at any one time. And DISC is an easy enough to understand framework that, like you said, if you go through a basic of it, you can kind of begin to learn very quickly. Oh, I'm looking for these indicators, and that's kind of, this person's probably wired like this, and so I should do this. So two examples, when I was in a leadership position, so for those of you that are familiar with DISC, I'm a high D, high C. So I have that tendency to be very task oriented. I don't think about people first. I think about getting stuff done first. That tends to be my driver. And here I have people reporting to me, all different kinds of styles. Well, guess what? Some of them were people that were high S kind of people. So high S folks are very people oriented. They're very fairness oriented. They like calm. They like collection. They like that. There's also folks that are I's. Those are also people oriented folks, but they tend to be more energy oriented, fun oriented, inspirational kind of folks. So I figured out real quickly that who are my S's that report to me. And I made a list, and then I divided them up, and I put 2 or 3 of them. I blocked off a certain amount of time on my calendar on Wednesday, and it had a pop-up that would come up, and it says, go visit, and it had their names. And I would go over to their cubicle. I would leave my office. I would walk to their cubicle. Hey, Amos, how you doing today? How are the kids? How'd the soccer game go a couple of weeks ago? Did they win? I just learned. By the way, I took notes. I literally walked up with a notebook and was writing stuff down. They loved it. They're looking at me going, he cares enough to actually write down so he can remember my kids' names and can remember what's going on and know something about my life and cares about me. And I did that. They cycled through. They literally knew their day. They
Yep.
learned very quickly. Okay, on Wednesday, on the first Wednesday of the month, Scott visits me. And they looked forward to it. And the reason why, now again, that is not natural to me. That is not what I would have done naturally. I literally turned visiting somebody who needs that human contact into a task because I'm task oriented.
Yep.
And did it as a task. But I did it with authenticity. I did it with meaning. I didn't try to lie about it or hide about it. By the way, you'll notice I didn't go visit the I's. I didn't mention anything about them. The reason why is they show up in your office. They come to visit you. You don't have to go seek them out. They'll come to you. So I didn't need to do that. I could still serve them and interact with them and have fun with them, but do it in a different way.
Yep.
And so, again, it's that a level of awareness of that. And then earlier I talked about clarity of communication. The second real quick example I'll give is my immediate boss, was a very high D, like extremely high D. He wanted the executive summary in 3 bullets.
Yep.
That's all he wanted to know. He didn't care about the details. That's not important to him. But his boss, who was also on all the emails I sent to him, she was the high C who wanted all of the details. So I literally learned to write emails that would say, hey, blah, blah, blah. Here's the executive summary. Here's the 3 important bullets. More information below. Salutation. And then I'd write the really long email with all of the details because I knew he didn't read below. He read the executive summary. He was done. He did not read the rest of the email. It was there if he needed it, but he didn't read it.
Yep.
But his boss read every line of that email. So I knew I had to provide that for her. Otherwise, what would happen? Well, 5 minutes after I sent the email, I'd get a phone call from her wanting to know all the details anyway. So it made me more efficient to just go ahead and give her the information. And that way I knew that it was done and she had it and we could move on. And so again, it was learning in that case, not just my immediate supervisor, but one level above what was needed there so that I could provide it. And that was just understanding what they needed, how they were wired.
So I'll share a secret of mine, but I might get myself in trouble. Hopefully my wife doesn't listen to this episode, but it won't get me in trouble. But I am a DC as well. So I, just like you, very task oriented and don't think about people. So even in my home life, what I have learned, and I have an iPhone and I'm able to put in location based reminders. And so I actually have a reminder that when I'm arriving at home, I have a reminder that pops up that says, forget about work, go ask your wife how her day was and see, because I am so, I'm on to the next task. And by me putting that in that way, that's now on my calendar, in my reminders. And as I'm getting out of my vehicle, it pops right up on my phone and says that. And otherwise, I would walk in and go to the next task, and it has nothing to do with the fact that I don't love my wife. It's just that that's how I'm wired. So you have to change that way. But that's a pretty, I guess, extreme example. But you got to remind yourself.
It's the exact same thing. You've got to be aware. The way I always explain it to folks is if I speak French, well, I'll do it different because this is probably more authentic. I speak German, because I'm very task-oriented. German people are supposed to be task-oriented, right? And my wife speaks French, the very more love language. And I want to tell my wife I love her. I can yell at her in German all day long.
Yep.
It's not going to feel as good as if I make the effort to learn to say I love you in French.
Yep.
It's going to feel more authentic and more real to her. It's the same thing. It's just having the decency to recognize, hey, I'm just learning to speak their language a little bit. I'm not going to ever be perfectly fluent in it.
Yep.
It's never going to come naturally. It's always going to be work, but I can learn,
So as we're wrapping up, one question that I have been thinking about quite a bit, and I guess there's kind of two pieces to it, but we've talked about productivity opposed to just being busy. We've talked about clarity of communication for when you're with whoever you're working with, and making sure that we try to communicate in a way that whoever's receiving the message is actually going to receive that message the way it makes sense to them. Hence, we talked about DISC. What about the future as we start to see more and more things come out every other day? I see a new AI tool that pops up. I've seen some that say, hey, we will make you 50% more productive if you let AI run your calendar and run your appointments and run even our podcast. You went to a link and booked it yourself, which is tied to my calendar. So we're seeing more and more of those things. So I guess it's a two-piece question. One, what do you think the future looks like? Is there going to be something that pops up that, revolutionizes everything we do? And secondly, do you think, having good knowledge and having conversations like we're doing through a podcast someday disappear because we can do it through AI? What are your thoughts?
In my experience, tools are tools, and there's no one perfect tool that works for every person in every situation perfectly. Because it's kind of exactly what we were just talking about. You get back to things like DISC. We're wired differently. We're motivated differently. We have different callings. We have different passions. We look at the world different. We have different experiences. Now, will AI ever reach a point where it can understand all of that? Maybe. I mean, honestly, I don't know. It's certainly possible. Could you use a tool like AI to help plan your day and keep you more focused and do all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And would it maybe be helpful and maybe be more efficient and maybe, help you filter out some of the noise and those sorts of things? Sure. But here's the thing about tools. They only work if you actually use them. And that's a human factor. At the end of the day, you've still got to train that AI tool. You've still got to put inputs into it. You've still got to then follow through. If it plans your day and says, here's what you should be working on from 8 to 9, guess what? You've still got to work on that from 8 to 9. You've still got to put some inputs into it. You've still got to actually put energy and effort into it. And again, when we were talking about that review, reflect, and all of that kind of stuff, you've got to train it. You've got to tell it, hey, that doesn't work. This works. And you've got to adapt over time. And again, whether it's a tool that has AI or doesn't have AI embedded in it, I don't think that necessarily changes this. It may just change how quickly or efficiently it learns. It makes it better at adapting and learning, which is great. But you've still got to have that input and that driver. So as a coach, where I spend most of my time and energy, I tell people I'm a stewardship coach. I help people master their time, their talent, and their treasures, right? That's kind of the subtitle of the book has time, talent, and treasures. The trick or the secret is I really only work in talent. Because at the end of the day, how you handle your time and how you handle your money is actually about how you handle yourself.
Yep.
I think the same thing's true using an AI tool. The tool's only going to do so much. You've still got to handle yourself. You've still got to know yourself. You've still got to have all of those things for it to actually help you.
I would agree. I actually, I have a calendar class that I give, which I call it a calendar class, but it's some of the things we've talked about as it relates to kind of the differences between appointments and your to-dos and so on and so forth, and just organizing things a little bit better. But I tell everybody that takes the class, you can use any tool that you want to use. I still use a pen and paper. But my point is that if you cannot do it on a pen and paper with a piece of paper and a pen, you won't do it with a computer. You won't do it with a new piece of technology. The technology can aid us, but I would agree. I think you got to have the discipline to be able to do it. So I always ask all of our guests 2 questions at the end. These are probably the hardest 2 questions, but the most fun. The first one is, what is your go-to business book that you have continually used throughout your career that you continue to go back to?
Specific to business, probably The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which is probably an unusual one to put out there. But again, it comes back to my focus, this idea of focusing on not really the tool or the technique or that sort of thing, but developing those routines and habits that let us do that incremental 1% better success. And his framework on how we look at habits and change habits is one that I've used for decades now and found very successful.
Awesome. And the last question is, what technology is your favorite piece of technology that you use?
Actually, Zoom. I've been using Zoom since before Zoom was cool. I was on Zoom, pre-pandemic, so before everyone else discovered Zoom. And I've been using, again, my business is virtual. I meet with clients all over the world. I do my business via Zoom. And I've loved the ability that it has given me to actually reach out and connect and help people regardless of location, regardless of time zone, regardless, I've even worked like the wife or the husband was deployed in the military and the spouse, the husband or wife that was back home, and able to talk with all of us, on a conversation together and those sorts of things. So that power that it's had to bring people together despite location, despite time, has been great for me. Now, obviously, I still like meeting people in person and those sorts of things, but Zoom has kind of opened up avenues that quite frankly, wouldn't have been possible without some sort of technology like that.
Yep. So where can folks find out a little bit more about you?
So I actually put a landing page together just for your listeners. So if you go over to my website, which is inspiredstewardship.com and then /McCoy, you'll find a link over there with some free resources in these areas of time, talent, and treasures. There's information about my podcast, my book, all of that is found there. There's even a place where you could book a small 30-minute call with me if you've just got questions or something that I said today resonated. If you'd like to jump on a call, always happy to do that with listeners as well. So you can find that at inspiredstewardship.com /McCoy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a lot of fun. I think we could have probably talked for another 45 minutes, so maybe we'll get you back on in the future here. But for all of our listeners, until next time, don't forget to check out our website and social media as well, which we'll have in the show notes. And until next time, thanks, and we'll see you.